I welcome you all with peace, and today we're discussing two complementary Parshas, Parsha Balak and Parsha Pinchas. They go together. So let's start with Parsha Balak, which is the first. And what we see is Israel is about to enter the promised land. The Moabites, who weren't supposed to be attacked, but they felt threatened and saw that they couldn't defeat Israel militarily, called upon Balak, the sorcerer, to curse Israel and defeat him on the dark occult levels. Okay, the first time they go to him, he turns them down because he knows this isn't so good. And he doesn't need to act against God. Now there's a relationship. Balaam was trained by the father of by Laban, okay, who was the father of Jacob's wives, okay. So there's this interplay, Rachel being one, and there is there's an interplay. People kind of know who each other are, so to speak, like that. So here we go. So they call Balak. Balaam says no. Then Balak sends more money, more offers of money and honor, and he pulls Balaam into a circle. Now, how is it that people kind of have these sensitivities and powers? Again, it was Rachel and Leah. I just want to say that as the daughters. And how does it happen? And we look at Anakin Skywalker, who had all kinds of talent and ability, but what happened? Didn't listen to God, didn't listen to his teacher, didn't listen to or connect to the Jedi Knights, and perhaps most important, he didn't listen to his wife. So we have this kind of, and he had the lust for power. So that brings him to the downfall. And the same thing happens with Balaam. So Balaam consents. First God had said no, but then he kind of goes back and negotiates, and really God has said no, okay? But he says, okay, if you just follow what I say, follow the words in your mouth, it's good. But even when he leaves on his donkey, an angel appears before him, and the donkey stops, and the really donkey represents, in a sense, the energies of one last chance before you go completely to the dark side, Balaam. So it stops in front, and the message is, well, you can still curse those to the right and to the left. Then it goes against the wall and pinches his leg, and it's like, wait, this is getting very narrow, and you only have Ishmael's people to curse. And then it finally, the donkey stops, but he just keeps beating the donkey, ignores the messages. That's key. Ignores the messages, and that would have saved his life. So he then goes and agrees to with Balak. Balaam agrees with Balak to try to curse Israel. Okay, and he tries 3 times, but every time he comes out, he's going to do it, a blessing comes out. And finally, Balak gives up and says, get out of here. But here are the blessings, because I kind of want to quote it more directly and try to explain it, because it's all part of prophecy, because Balaam actually gives prophecy all the way into the end of times, which I believe we're partly in. So he says, I see it rock-like, and from the hills do I see it. Behold, it is a nation that will dwell in solitude and not be reckoned among the nations. Okay, this is from the Torah, okay, directly. This is the Torah. And what is he saying? Well, he's talking about the spiritual path. To fully go on the spiritual path, we have to be in a level of solitude. I don't mean isolation, but a level of solitude. Like Shanti and I are here, we're living in a house, we're like hermits, but we're focusing on God. We're not part of the bigger scene. That's a really important thing, because once you become part of the bigger scene, you kind of lose your focus on God. I mean, it's all pervasive. So at one point, as part of the Native American energies, the different teachers, shamans we met in Central America. And from all different places. I was a representative of Lakota Sioux, and they served hot dogs, okay? Besides the fact that I'm a vegan, they serve hot dogs. What are you doing serving hot dogs? This is a Native American gathering for all the tribes from the tip of South America all the way to Alaska, and you're serving hot dogs? But that's the effect of losing your individualization. That's the effect of losing your ability to be separate and stay on. You start serving hot dogs. I wasn't too popular when I kind of brought that up, but nevertheless. And not be reckoned among the nations. What does that mean? Very specifically, at the end of times, the nations are going to be, in essence, punished. Now, the simple way of saying it, but Israel will not be reckoned. Israel will not be part of that. Israel will shine. And they saw that. That's why they wanted to block it. That's why they wanted Balaam to prevent them entering Israel, because the power is greatly increased. And I mean the power is greatly increased. It's true. Some people can't handle it. I've treated people for what we call the Jerusalem psychosis. There's just too much energy and people freak out. And as a psychiatrist, I literally deal with that. Some people I say, well, you can go to Israel for a day or two or three, but you don't live there. It's not going to work for you. You're not quite ready yet. Okay? So, reckon among the nations. And then he says, who has counted the dust of Jacob or numbered a quart of Israel? And what they're talking about, the dust, really is the offspring and the power of that. But it also means the dust in the sense of certain ceremonies that were given, like the red heifer ceremony, that there's a certain power. And there's another piece here that's taught in the Mishnah, which is God wanted a place to be on the earth plane. Now, from my perspective, everything is the dance of the divine in the earth plane, so there's no place that God isn't. But nevertheless, there's a little bit of a teaching. The real message is, can Israel create enough light to help people recognize the light of God in all creations? That is what we're talking about. Slightly different understanding. God's always here. God was prior to creation. So it's not that God wants a place. God exists. Can we see that existence? Can we see the dance of God in all things? Can we see the dance of God in the very dust of the earth? That's part of the role of Israel that they were trying to block. Because once Israel comes into the Holy Land, that power to help people wake up to God in all things will be released. Okay, and finally, so Balaam gets, there's no way my occult work is going to make any difference. I can't defeat these people with the black occult arts. It's not going to happen. And I think that's a very, very key teaching. What released Israel from Egypt, the master of the black arts, Egypt, was the power of God. Not that complicated, the power of God. And Balaam recognizes his dark occult things can't do it either, because the power of God is greater. And I actually didn't get this. I mean, I don't know how many times I've read the Torah, but it's like more than, hundreds of times, okay? I didn't get it till today. And I'm kind of reflecting back in some of the work that I've done, because they also talk at some point of demons, Shaddayim, and lost souls, so to speak, and what do we do with these debukim, we call them, and it's the power of God that releases it. And in reflecting back, I had to look at this, and then we also have to ask a question: how's Balaam getting all these great blessings? And he's like totally on the dark side. How does that happen? And for those of you who aren't too much into yoga and so forth, I just want to share a story which awoken me to the power of God. When we were living in India in an ashram, every day at 4:30 in the morning, on our way to the morning chanting and prayers and so forth, our family would walk down. I had already warmed up. I get up at 2:30 in the morning doing my things. And then, but every day my daughter began to cry when we get to a certain thing. And her legal name is Heather, but Ganga, the wild Ganga of Ganges. And we go at a certain place and she started crying. It's like, what's going on? And she had no clue what was going on. So I actually went to Muktananda with my daughter. I said, I don't know what's going on. We go past a certain thing, and she starts crying. He says, that's because there's an evil spirit in the adjoining field. And I'm empowering you to go out and deal with it, to banish it. Now, I have to tell you, I wasn't really in a big hurry to do this, but it's my daughter. It's a directive of the guru. What am I going to do? But I did it. So I went out in this field with certain prayers and mantras, but the power of God. And I banished the demon. I actually banished the demon. I was shocked. Okay, first I survived. Second, I banished this demon. And my daughter never cried anymore. We'd walk past that. And she didn't know I had done the ceremony. Okay, so it's like, oh. So it taught me a very, very, very important lesson that I just got now, 50 years later. Okay? Slow starter. Well, 45 years later. Slow starter. What is that? It is we are given the power of God, which is more powerful than the dark occult. Okay? That power of God, which honestly, since that time, I guess it was more of my mission. I mentioned in my book, soon to be out in a few months, Into the Nothing, that given the power really to banish demons and debuks, and actually literally going into the concentration camps and releasing the lost souls. And I mean literally doing this. I mean going to Ravensbrück, which was a work camp where 100,000 men and women died, mostly women, and doing ceremony and seeing demons coming out of the ground. Not just me, other people could see them. And it's like, what? And then going to Auschwitz and other places too, and creating pillars of light where people could be released. So it's the power of God. Like, it just didn't get it. I thought the ceremony, it's the power of God. And same with Blood Island for Native Americans who were killed there. It's the power of God. It's like, it kind of blew my mind. Today, I got it. That different than the dark occult, we defeat the dark occult by the power of invoking the power of God. So simple. But nevertheless, big teaching. So Balaam didn't really get that, and except he couldn't defeat them as the dark occult. So he said, fine, let me try to get him to sin, And then the next statement comes out, and this is again a Balaam's statement of blessing. He perceived no iniquity in Jacob, and so nor perversity in Israel. Hashem, his God, is with him, and the friendship of the king is with him. Now, what is that? Well, hey, clearly people got involved. The women of Midian, the Moabites, seduced the men, had them bow in front of Baal, Peor, before they would sleep with them. And people kind of lost their moral strength. But the message here is no iniquity. How can that be? Clearly, they were sinning. Because the message of the Torah is that sin is not permanent on your soul. Deep teaching, okay? Sin is not permanent. What we call in Torah is missing the mark, okay? It's not permanent. So there's 3 steps of what's going on. One has to recognize that you missed the mark, one has to ask for forgiveness, and then there's redemption. And when you follow those 3 steps, that sin gets washed away from your soul, because ultimately our souls are pure. So the deep Torah teaching is sin is missing the mark is an imposition on our soul, but it's not permanent. And so if we choose, we can do this. We can, and there is a process again where we see where we missed the mark, we ask for forgiveness and was missing the mark, and then we change our ways. You've got to change your ways. You can't just keep missing the mark. We change our ways, and then there's redemption. It's very beautiful, very, very powerful. And that's a very key message here. That's what's going on. So yes, they missed the mark. And yes, there can be and there was redemption. Now, I mentioned, and I'm going to quote, there is no divination in Jacob and no sorcery. So all this is done without any of the occult arts. It's simply done by invoking the power of God. That's what blew my mind. It's like you read these things, and you read these things, and you read these things over the years, and one day you get it. That's what I finally got. It's the power of God. Gabriel, the power of God. No divination in Jacob and no sorcery. Forget it. The power of God trumps all of that. And that was what Balaam faced, and that's why he tried to get people to sin, and it didn't work. And then he gives another blessing, on the third thing. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places. Now, what are those tents? Well, it's the yeshivas. It's the prayer places. It's where people meet in prayer. The tents in the holiness, okay? And that's the point. Here's what he says. And again, this is the lowest of the lowest. Balaam, the deep, dark, black occult magician, blessing Israel. It's unbelievable. He says, it is God who brought you out of Egypt according to the power of his loftiness. There it is, right in front of my eyes. And it's like, how long did it take me to get this? Okay? He will consume the nations that oppress him. That's what we're talking about. This is the end of times now. The nations that oppress the spirit of Israel and the literal N Israel, they will be consumed. This is why it's so important to be in Israel to activate that. Okay? He crouched and lay down like a lion cub. Who can stand up to him? Those who bless you are blessed, and those who curse you are cursed. Could that be any more clear? That's also what was said to Abraham. Those who bless you are blessed, those who curse you are cursed. And here's this black magician repeating the blessing. So from the lowest comes the highest kind of energy. And then he talks about the end of days. a star has issued from Jacob, okay, and a scepter bearer has risen from Israel. So the star is the king, the scepter is the power of God coming out of Israel. It's a little mind-blowing. And so Edom and Seir, who attempt to oppress, will be defeated. Okay, and that's what is coming here. So that's that level of prophecy. So in the meantime, we have, Balaam, who's in a sense the darkest, lowest to lowest, giving the highest blessings. And we see now one simple, essential message. It's called the power of God. The power of God to dismiss demons and displaced beings, okay? It's like, wow, okay? And now, as people are out of balance, we go into Parsha Pinchas, and Pinchas is inspired as he sees Zimri, the leader, tribe of Shimon, takes Cosby, who's from Midian, and he challenges Moses, and they start to have intercourse in front of Moses, and or in his tent in front of Moses, so to speak, and everybody's like stuck, and Pinchas is inspired to act. So he gets their permission, and the spirit of Nadav and Avihu, which is Aaron's sons, who offered, let's say, inappropriate fire offerings, comes into him, and he's greatly empowered, and he takes a spear and kills them. Cosby and Zimri. It's like, are we condemning? I mean, are we saying it's good to do these things? To be a zealot and just to go on killing people? Not exactly. It's not what we're talking about. This is a one-time thing that was the immediate preservation. 24,000 men had already died because they had been sexually inappropriate and didn't ask for that redemption process. And it's like everything's being immediately threatened. So Pinchas' action is divinely inspired. It's a one-time thing. It's a defensive action to literally save Israel. And from that, he got a lot of negative feedback from the different tribes, and God gives him the honor of peace. Okay, and he becomes the next high priest. So that's a huge message. So sometimes we act, but we can't act out of the blue. You had to act spiritually appropriate. It has to be a one-time thing. It has to be collective. I look at how did Balaam fall, and I talk about. I already mentioned that he kind of lost his social contacts and his connection with God. Pinchas didn't do that. He did ask permission, and he was totally in protection of the people. Okay, now as it goes on in Pinchas, there's the 5 daughters, and they had no brothers, and there's no inheritance. So they come to Moses and say, well, our father died in the wilderness. He was all aligned with what was going on. And it's like, we deserve the inheritance, even if there isn't a male here. Remember, this is 3,300 years ago. And Moses speaks to God and said, absolutely, they do get the inheritance. So that changes all the rules, the male-female transmission and so forth. So it's like, well, that's pretty impressive. So we now have a kind of a very clear message that how important it is to be inspired by God in our actions. And that's how it's different than Zealot too. I want to say that the Zealot, like Pinchas, is a one-time action here inspired by the love of God. not out of hate, but by the love of God. And when we have that love of God in all our actions, then a small group of people who's very focused can uplift all of humanity. And that's really the message here that we got from Pinchas, his action. Small person, single action, changed the course of history. So may we all be blessed to understand the importance of invoking the power of God into our life as a way of dispelling, in a sense, transforming the dark forces on every level. And may we truly be inspired to return to God in every aspect. And may our eyes be open to see the dance of God in all creation. Shalom, shalom, shalom. And just look into the camera for a second. We're going to all go into meditation and let that firepower of God come through and help awaken. Now let's all go into meditation. Shalom, shalom, shalom.